Mercedes reveals development targets for the W16, Lewis Hamilton gets ousted for his Brazilian Grand Prix performance, and Carlos gets complimented for going to Williams. Do consider subscribing to the channel. Let's get into the latest F1 news. Damon Hill dubbed Carlos Sainz a thoroughly brilliant racing driver, and the 1996 world champion sees it as a compliment that he wasn't signed for Red Bull. Sainz will head to Williams for the F1 2025 season and beyond, and while the Spanish driver admitted it hurt at the time to not land an immediately front-running seat for next year, he has since come to peace with it. Sainz spoke of holding talks with every team on the grid with a seat available while he was a free agent, with the most competitive Red Bull and Mercedes, ultimately opting to renew with Sergio Perez and promote promising rookie Andrea Kimi Antonelli, respectively. The 30-year-old told Sky F1, "It hurt at the time, we all have egos, and I have a driver ego, and I couldn't understand it at the time. I still personally cannot understand certain choices that people have done, but at the same time it creates even more of a challenge in me, and it even makes me more excited for Williams." But in response to that interview, the 1996 world champion believes Sainz has shown himself to be a valuable driver to anyone on the grid, with the former Williams driver seeing it as a compliment that Red Bull didn't sign him, with Max Verstappen firmly holding #1 status as it stands. "He's thoroughly professional. I think that any team will benefit from having Carlos there," Hill said. "I mean, he's clearly looking over his shoulder with maybe a small tear in his eye as he's leaving Ferrari. He's contributed so much to them. I don't know how you can fault him, really. I mean, maybe he's not as fast as Charles Leclerc on occasions, but he's a thoroughly brilliant racing driver. So on he goes to another team. I take it as a compliment that he didn't get into Red Bull." Given he found out he was being replaced at Ferrari before the season began, Hill acknowledged Sainz was in a difficult position, but added he could take solace in the fact that it will be the most successful driver in the sport's history coming to Ferrari in his stead rather than someone he considers a lesser driver. Hill told a previous episode of the Sky F1 podcast, "I think it's very tough. I'm sure he feels he's put in his heart and soul into Ferrari, and he hasn't really left them short in any way. Well, they've chosen this enormous entity, which is Lewis Hamilton, his reputation, his fame, his results. You know, it's very difficult to feel annoyed that you've been replaced by someone that good. The only consolation is that the guy that replaced you was a 7-time world champion with over 100 Grand Prix victories, and then you can kind of, I suppose, console yourself that you weren't replaced by someone you considered less than you." Lando Norris is at risk of becoming one of the incredibly fastest drivers possibly not to have won a world championship, according to Eddie Jordan. The former F1 team owner puts that down to how the McLaren driver should have been out of sight at certain races this year, while title rival Max Verstappen struggled. Jordan's podcast co-host, former McLaren and Red Bull driver David Coulthard, was quick to add that this was not a reflection that Norris would never win a title, but the Scot added his belief he is still maturing into a complete Grand Prix driver. Jordan, meanwhile, put forward the argument that the Briton may have shown himself to be too nice on track this year, with Verstappen able to limit the damage to his world championship lead, while McLaren held a significant competitive advantage. The pair were involved in close battles in Austin and Mexico in particular, before Verstappen recovered from 17th on the grid to take victory at Interlagos last time, out in what could prove to be the critical blow in this year's title fight. Lando Norris has been brought up by an amazing, lovely, beautiful, caring family. And is there an argument to say that he's too nice? Yes, possibly, Jordan explained on a recent episode of the Formula for Success podcast. The fact is that Lando Norris will go down in the history books as being one of the most incredibly fastest drivers possibly not to have won a world championship, and the reason being, he should have been out of sight on several races this year, where there is not a chance Max had the car that he had. Coulthard added to Jordan's assertion by clarifying, "I know you weren't saying he'll never be a world champion, but you're throwing out there that he might not have all the ingredients to win a world championship, going toe-to-toe with the likes of a Max. But I actually take the view that McLaren entered this year as part of their rebuilding, working their way towards challenging for world championships. And it came as a bit of a surprise to them when they were in that position. And it's taken them a little while to adapt and really believe that they can win the Constructors' Championship and could win the Drivers' Championship. I think they are almost there in their mind, where they've got that attacking mentality that I believe that they've had in the past, and they're certainly getting there now." But I think maybe Lando is the same. He's still maturing into this complete Grand Prix driver. He's got all the speed, we love how open he is. Everything is there. I think that he's still maturing into that person, and I believe in Lando. But at a certain point, he's gotta go. Max, you think I'm going to leave the door open and you can send the car? Well, actually the door's closed, and if we crash, we crash. It almost needs to be one of those situations, because you race different drivers in a different way. I think Lando is just that one step away from fully understanding how to race his competitors. Mercedes trackside engineering director Andrew Shovlin explained the team will look to resolve a lingering issue in slow-speed corners in the development of the W16. Shovlin said slow corners following each other is where Mercedes have had a weakness in performance, and while the team brought an upgrade with them to Austin, they did not expect that package to bring a solution with it. Mercedes sit fourth in the constructors' standings heading into the final 3 races of the season, and the attention of most teams is likely to be on the development of their 2025 challengers. For Mercedes, they confirmed they are very busy, working on trying to improve their performance out of slower corners in the hope it will bring them closer to their front-running rivals next season. Where we tend to be weak, it is in the slow-speed corners, particularly the ones where you have got one corner following into another, Shovlin said in Mercedes' post-Brazil debrief. There is a lot of turning of the car, and that is a weakness that we need to work on. We did not expect this update kit to improve that. All we expected was this to just lift the base performance of the car. In terms of what we have seen, we are confident it is doing what was expected. However, we are also confident there is some fundamentals that we have got to get to grips with this car in order to fix them on the W16, and we are very busy with that right now, and hopefully making the right changes over the winter, so that we are not struggling with these weaknesses next year. With that, Shovlin was asked what lessons the team are looking to take into the development of the W16, with next year's car already likely to be underway in its design process. He confirmed that lingering slow speed issue is what the team will be looking to address, and they will be using the remaining races of 2024 to gather more data to inform the development of the W16. The main thing in terms of learning is that the corners that we are weak in are still the same ones, Shovlin said. It is the interconnected slow corners. That is normally where we trip up. Going into this weekend, we certainly had Sector 2 in Brazil, which has a lot of those corners on our radar as an area that we might struggle. The big focus in these remaining races for us is learning what we can. We are in a position in the championship where we cannot challenge in front of us. It is very unlikely we are going to see any challenge from behind. Our focus has very much shifted to learning what we need to this year to apply to next year in order to get on top of those issues. In Brazil, it was useful having that wet running because you want to get a read on the car in the wet. There is always a few wet quali and race sessions over the year. It was reassuring to see that the pace in those conditions was decent, but we are going to be looking at all the remaining tracks to assess performance and just confirm what we understand about this car, and whether the changes we are hoping to make for next year are going to improve those areas. Vegas has a lot of straight line and low-speed corners. Qatar is a faster track, and then, finishing in Abu Dhabi, which is a mix of everything, it will give us a good read on how we are performing and who is the benchmark. Sometimes it is Red Bull, sometimes McLaren, sometimes Ferrari, but it will allow us to establish the gap that we need to close down over those winter months. Former Ferrari and Williams senior figure Rob Smedley believes Ferrari is in a win-win situation for F1 2025 as Lewis Hamilton arrives to partner Charles Leclerc. With just 3 races left in F1 2024, Carlos Sainz will depart Ferrari after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix to make way for the arrival of Hamilton as the 7-time F1 world champion departs Mercedes for the Scuderia. Hamilton will partner the established Leclerc at Ferrari in F1 2025, a formidable challenge for the British driver as the Monegasque, although not yet a world champion, is one of the most highly rated and well-rounded drivers on the grid. Leclerc is a product of the Ferrari Junior program and became the de facto team leader after outperforming 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel in 2019 and 20, and is well loved within the walls of Maranello. Rob Smedley, a former leading figure within Ferrari's hierarchy as race engineer to Felipe Massa, appeared on the Formula for Success podcast to discuss what may lie ahead for Hamilton and Leclerc next season, with podcast host Eddie Jordan suggesting that Hamilton won't be going in thinking that he can beat Leclerc with ease, an opinion shared by Smedley. I don't think that Lewis will go in there with that attitude. I think that Lewis is a true professional, he said. He knows how good Charles is, but he will also back himself to beat him over 24 races. I think he will beat him. I think there'll come a point when he won't be able to do that anymore, but it's certainly not now. The guy's so fit, he's so mentally strong when he's motivated. What we've seen with Lewis over these last couple of years is, I don't want to call it a lack of motivation because that would be disrespectful to the guy, but I think we've seen every now and again some frustration that comes through in him not being able to then deliver at 10/10 like he has done in the past. But there's no doubt about the amount of passion that this guy has, and how much he wants to win. Look at his reaction after the British Grand Prix this year. That tells you everything you need to know, right? This is a guy that hasn't won for years, and then he comes back and he wins. It was just like a masterclass in Lewis Hamilton, 7 times world champion, how to win a race. A super impressive drive. You saw the passion at the end, you saw the emotion. This guy wants to win, and with anybody who's done really well in life, there's also a certain amount of humility where you're constantly looking inward and thinking, what do I need to do better? So I don't think Lewis is going to go to Ferrari and think that he's going to be able to trounce Charles, because I don't think he will be able to, because it just won't be that easy, because Charles is a great peddler. But I believe he will work very hard. I think he'll integrate himself into the team, and I think that will be the making of the next stage. Podcast co-host David Coulthard said he reckons Leclerc will have the edge in terms of pace over Hamilton, but the risk is there that Leclerc's tendency to make high-profile mistakes could become his legacy. I think Charles will be on average quicker, the Scot said. But I think that there's a real chance that Lewis will piece together more victories until Charles either is the final product of a world champion and he becomes that man who just suddenly starts doing the sort of performances year in, year out that we've seen from Lewis or Michael Schumacher or Ayrton Senna or whoever your favorite driver is. Or he'll be what's considered the one that got away, quick, brilliant to watch in qualifying, but makes too many mistakes. Smedley said he agreed with Coulthard's perspective and said that while the challenge ahead for both drivers is massive due to the talents of their teammate, it's a win-win situation for Ferrari. There's another point in that chronological trajectory as well because it's physiological, he said. It's that Lewis kind of starts to slow down a little bit, and when that is, we don't know. It's definitely not in the next year or two because if you look at how psychologically strong he is, how motivated he is, how physically fit the guy is, that's not coming in anytime soon. But isn't this a win-win situation for Ferrari as well? Because they've got this 7-time world champion coming in, he's going to boost Charles because Charles is in a situation where he's almost. I don't want to call him the young apprentice now, but he'll feel a very different dynamic and a very different relationship to what he felt with Carlos Sainz, for example, where they were two peers, both at the same stages of their career, or very similar stages of their career, and both needing to beat each other. Charles has got a bit of slack here, right? He's up against a 7-time world champion. It's a completely different situation, but it's like Felipe Massa in 2006 against Michael Schumacher. He was the apprentice, and it was all right that he got beat by Michael, and then by the end of the year, he was actually beating him on merit in qualifying. Not in races, but he did beat him in some races fortuitously. I think we've got a similar situation with Charles. If Charles is not the one who gets away, then it's just a win-win situation, isn't it? You've got this 7-time world champion, a guy who can learn from him and eventually become the real deal himself. By this point, Lewis is ready to retire and exit stage left, and now you've got this fully formed world champion who's going to be a winning machine. Celebrity F1 fan Jeremy Clarkson believes the Brazilian Grand Prix proved that outgoing Mercedes driver Lewis Hamilton is past his prime in Formula One. And he reckons Hamilton's F1 2021 title rival Max Verstappen may be the greatest driver we've ever seen, after claiming arguably the best victory of his career in Sao Paulo. Verstappen took a giant step towards a 4th consecutive world championship last weekend in Brazil, triumphing from 17th on the grid. The Red Bull driver now holds a 62-point lead over Lando Norris ahead of the final 3 races of the F1 2024 season in Las Vegas, Qatar, and Abu Dhabi. Another title success would see Verstappen become only the 2nd driver in F1 history, after Red Bull icon Sebastian Vettel, who dominated between 2010 and 2013, to win his first 4 world championships in successive years. Verstappen's devastating performance in Brazil came on a weekend Hamilton, the most decorated driver in history with a joint record 7 titles and more than 100 Grand Prix wins and pole positions to his name, struggled to get a tune out of his Mercedes. Hamilton failed to reach Q3 in qualifying for both the sprint and main races, with the Mercedes driver struggling to a distant 10th in a race in which teammate George Russell started on the front row and led the early stages. Russell has started ahead of his illustrious teammate at 16 of the 21 races held to date in F1 2024, not including sprint qualifying sessions. Hamilton, who will turn 40 in January, announced earlier this year that he will join Ferrari on a multi-year contract from F1 2025, extending his career into a 19th season. Writing in his column for the Sun newspaper, Clarkson claimed that Hamilton is now too old to perform at his peak, with Verstappen potentially emerging as the greatest driver in F1 history. He said, "We learned 2 important things during last weekend's Grand Prix in Brazil. Well, 3, if you count Lance Stroll, who crashed his freshly repaired car on the formation lap, and then drove it into a gravel trap. First of all, Max Verstappen is one of the all-time greats. He may even be the greatest driver we've ever seen. And second, Lewis Hamilton is past his prime. He blamed his car for his tail-end qualifying session, but his teammate George Russell was on the front row. Of course, it's possible that because Lewis is moving to Ferrari next year, the team are filling his fuel tank with lemon barley water instead of petrol. But that seems unlikely. It's far more probable that he's now too old." Hamilton cut a downbeat figure at the end of the race in Brazil, admitting the second half of the F1 2024 season has been devastating, having hoped to end his Mercedes career on a high following victories at Silverstone and Spa prior to the summer break. He told reporters, "It doesn't feel good, obviously. It's devastating to have these bad races in the second half of the season, but all I can say is we're trying coming into the weekends, but it's definitely not acceptable. It's definitely not good enough. We have to take accountability. I have to take accountability, but I am doing the best with what I've got. For some reason, the car has been the worst of it this weekend, and I don't know what it is. We're going to have to find out what it is. One of the cars was working a lot better, so there's obviously potential still there. Let's not talk about the car because the car's no good. Yesterday was terrible, today was terrible. Yesterday was bad, qualifying was bad, sprint race was bad. The car's just been bad all weekend." Hamilton went on to add that he does not care where he finishes relative to Russell in the final standings, adding that he just wants to keep the car out of the wall at this stage of the season. He added, "I'm not fighting for the championship. Doesn't matter really where we finish in the championship. I don't care if I finish ahead of George or behind George. It doesn't make no difference to me. I just want to keep the car out of the wall and try to score points if I can for the team. If they give me a car that doesn't bounce off the track in the next few races, then hopefully we can get a better result. But looking forward to Christmas. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you around."